The autumn wind whistled through the tall pines surrounding the Johnson family cabin in rural Montana, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. 7-year-old Tyler Johnson pressed his small face against the frost-covered window, watching his older brother Jake chop firewood in the fading daylight of October 12, 1998. The boy's breath fogged the glass as he traced patterns with his finger, creating temporary art that would vanish as quickly as his childhood innocence was about to disappear. Margaret Johnson called from the kitchen where she was preparing their evening meal, her voice warm with maternal concern. "Tyler, honey, come help me set the table. Your father will be home from the logging camp soon." The smell of pot roast and vegetables filled the modest 2-bedroom cabin, a comforting aroma that would haunt the family's memories for decades to come. Tyler reluctantly pulled himself away from the window, his small sneakers padding across the worn wooden floor as autumn shadows stretched longer through the trees outside. If you're enjoying this story of mystery and human resilience, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps us bring you more incredible true stories like this one. David Johnson's pickup truck rumbled up the gravel driveway just as the first stars appeared in the Montana sky. The 34-year-old logger stepped out, his work boots crunching on fallen leaves as he breathed in the crisp mountain air. Inside the warm glow of the cabin windows, he could see his family moving about, preparing for another peaceful evening together. Margaret appeared in the doorway, her brown hair catching the porch light as she smiled and waved. Behind her, Jake was helping Tyler arrange plates on their small dining table, the scene representing everything David worked so hard to provide for his family. After dinner, as was their tradition on weekends, the Johnson family gathered around their old radio to listen to the Saturday evening mystery program. Tyler sat cross-legged on the braided rug, his eyes wide with excitement as the dramatic voices painted pictures of adventure and intrigue. Margaret and David exchanged knowing glances from their positions on the worn sofa, remembering their own childhood fascination with radio stories. Jake, now 15 and trying to appear too mature for such entertainment, nevertheless found himself drawn into the tale of a missing treasure hidden somewhere in the American West. The story on the radio told of a young boy who had discovered an old map in his grandfather's attic, leading to adventures that would change his life forever. Tyler listened with rapt attention, his imagination already spinning tales of his own potential discoveries in the vast wilderness surrounding their home. The cabin felt especially cozy that evening, with the fire crackling in the stone hearth and the wind singing through the pine boughs outside. None of them could have imagined that this would be their last normal evening together as a complete family. As the radio program ended and Margaret began preparing Tyler for bed, the boy begged for just a few more minutes of freedom. "Please, Mum, can I go outside and look for shooting stars? Jake said there might be some tonight." Margaret glanced at David, who nodded his approval with a gentle smile. The Montana wilderness had always been their backyard, and Tyler had played safely in the immediate area around the cabin countless times. "Just for 10 minutes, sweetheart," Margaret agreed, "and don't go past the big oak tree." Tyler's face lit up with joy as he grabbed his jacket and rushed outside into the crisp night air. The moon was nearly full, casting silver light through the forest canopy and illuminating the familiar paths that Tyler had explored since he could walk. He made his way to his favorite spot, a small clearing about 50 yards from the cabin where the view of the sky opened up between the towering pines. The 7-year-old lay on his back in the soft grass, still warm from the day's sunshine, and gazed up at the infinite expanse of stars above. In the distance, he could hear his mother calling his name, but the beauty of the night sky held him transfixed for just a moment longer. Margaret's voice grew more urgent. As the minutes passed beyond Tyler's allotted 10 minutes of stargazing, David joined her on the porch, his deeper voice calling through the darkness as they both strained to hear any response from their youngest son. The forest seemed to swallow their calls, returning only the whisper of wind through the branches and the distant hoot of an owl. Jake appeared beside them, concern creeping into his teenage features as he realized something was wrong. "I'll go look for him," he volunteered, grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer. The family spread out in different directions, their flashlight beams dancing across tree trunks and undergrowth as they called Tyler's name with increasing desperation. Margaret's heart raced as she checked all of his usual hiding spots, behind the woodshed, under the old apple tree, in the small cave formed by fallen rocks near the creek. David's logger instincts kicked in as he methodically searched the area, looking for any sign of his son's passage through the forest floor. The autumn night that had seemed so beautiful just an hour earlier now felt ominous and threatening. By midnight, with no trace of Tyler found anywhere within a mile radius of their cabin, David made the difficult decision to drive to the nearest neighbor's house and call for help. The Johnson family lived in relative isolation, with their closest neighbors, the Pattersons, living 3 miles down the mountain road. Margaret refused to leave the cabin, clinging to the hope that Tyler might return on his own, while Jake continued searching with systematic determination that belied his 15 years. The forest seemed to close in around them, its familiar paths transformed into a maze of shadows and uncertainty. Sheriff Robert Coleman arrived at dawn with a team of deputies and volunteer searchers from the small mountain community of Pine Ridge. The grizzled lawman had seen his share of missing persons cases in his 23 years of service, but something about Tyler's disappearance troubled him from the beginning. There were no signs of struggle, no tracks leading away from the area, and no indication that the boy had simply wandered off and become lost. It was as if Tyler Johnson had simply vanished into the Montana wilderness without leaving a trace behind. The search effort intensified over the following days, with teams of volunteers combing every inch of the surrounding forest. Helicopter sweeps revealed nothing but endless acres of pine trees and rocky outcroppings. Search dogs brought in from Billings lost Tyler's scent at the edge of the clearing where he had gone to watch for shooting stars, as if the boy had simply disappeared from that exact spot. Margaret barely slept or ate, maintaining a vigil at the cabin windows and refusing to accept that her youngest child might not be coming home. News media attention brought Tyler's story to statewide prominence, with his school photograph appearing on television screens across Montana and neighboring states. The image showed a bright-eyed boy with sandy brown hair and a gap-toothed smile, wearing his favorite dinosaur t-shirt and holding a toy truck. Margaret had taken the photo just 2 weeks before his disappearance, capturing a moment of pure childhood joy that now seemed impossibly distant. Tips and reported sightings poured in from across the region, but each lead ultimately proved fruitless. The FBI joined the investigation after the first week, bringing federal resources and expertise to bear on the baffling case. Special Agent Patricia Novak established a command center in Pine Ridge's small community hall, coordinating with local authorities and following up on hundreds of tips from concerned citizens. The agent's professional demeanor provided some comfort to the Johnson family, though her frank assessment of the situation offered little hope. Statistics showed that children who disappeared without a trace in wilderness areas were rarely found alive after the first 48 hours. David took leave from his logging job to join the search efforts full-time, his knowledge of the local terrain proving invaluable to the organized search teams. He guided groups through areas that only lifelong residents would know, pointing out hidden valleys, abandoned mine shafts, and seasonal hunting cabins that might provide shelter or concealment. His weathered hands shook as he marked locations on topographical maps, each X representing another place where his son was not found. Margaret watched from their cabin porch as search helicopters crisscrossed the sky above, their rhythmic beating becoming a soundtrack to her nightmare. As autumn gave way to winter, the official search was scaled back due to dangerous weather conditions and diminishing chances of finding Tyler alive. Sheriff Coleman made the difficult decision to suspend active operations until spring, though he promised the Johnson family that the case would remain open and active. Snow began falling in early November, covering the forest floor and eliminating any remaining physical evidence that might have led to Tyler's discovery. The cabin that had once been filled with laughter and warmth now felt hollow and cold, despite the fire that David kept burning continuously in the hearth. Margaret refused to pack away Tyler's belongings, maintaining his small bedroom exactly as he had left it on that fateful October evening. His dinosaur bedsheets remained unmade from his afternoon nap, and his collection of toy cars sat arranged on his windowsill just as he had left them. Jake struggled with guilt and anger, wondering if he should have gone outside with his little brother instead of pretending to be too cool for stargazing. The teenager threw himself into his studies and part-time work, using activity as a shield against the crushing weight of uncertainty that had settled over their family. The Pine Ridge community rallied around the Johnsons throughout that first terrible winter, bringing meals and offering practical support that helped them survive their darkest hours. Local church groups organized prayer vigils, and Tyler's second-grade teacher, Mrs. Patterson, maintained an empty desk with his name card throughout the remainder of the school year. The small mountain town had never experienced such a tragedy, and Tyler's disappearance cast a shadow over the tight-knit community that would persist for years to come. Spring brought renewed search efforts as snow melted from the mountain slopes and revealed terrain that had been inaccessible during the winter months. David and Jake joined every organized search, hiking through areas they had covered dozens of times before, clinging to the slim hope that winter storms might have uncovered some new clue to Tyler's fate. Margaret began seeing a grief counselor in the county seat, making the hour-long drive twice a week to meet with Dr. Patricia Wells, a kind woman who specialized in helping families cope with ambiguous loss. The second anniversary of Tyler's disappearance passed with a candlelight vigil in Pine Ridge's small town square, attended by nearly every member of the community. Margaret spoke briefly to the assembled crowd, her voice barely above a whisper, as she thanked everyone for their continued support and asked that people never stop watching for her son. Local news stations covered the memorial service, keeping Tyler's story in the public consciousness and maintaining hope that someone, somewhere, might have information that could bring him home. Years passed with heartbreaking regularity, each marking another milestone that Tyler would miss. His 8th birthday came and went without celebration, followed by his 9th, 10th, and beyond. Margaret continued working as a part-time bookkeeper for local businesses, while David returned to logging, but never with the same enthusiasm he had once brought to his work. Jake graduated from high school and enrolled at Montana State University, choosing to study criminal justice with the unspoken goal of somehow contributing to his brother's case or helping other missing children. Sheriff Coleman retired in 2005, but not before ensuring that Tyler's case files were thoroughly organized and transferred to his successor, Deputy Sheriff Angela Martinez. The dedicated officer had worked on Tyler's case since the beginning and promised Margaret that she would never let the investigation grow cold. New technologies like DNA analysis and digital databases offered fresh avenues for investigation, though Tyler's case remained frustratingly devoid of physical evidence that could benefit from such advances. The Johnson family adapted to their new reality, learning to function despite the Tyler-shaped hole in their lives. David and Margaret's marriage weathered the storm of their loss, strengthened by their shared grief and mutual support during the darkest times. They found ways to honor Tyler's memory through charitable work, with organizations dedicated to missing children, and Margaret became a volunteer victim advocate, helping other families navigate the bewildering world of law enforcement and media attention that surrounds such cases. Jake graduated from college, and joined the Montana State Police, fulfilling his childhood dream of becoming a law enforcement officer while carrying the additional motivation of his brother's unsolved disappearance. His first assignment was to a district 3 counties away, but he maintained regular contact with Sheriff Martinez and continued reviewing Tyler's case files whenever possible. The young trooper brought fresh eyes and modern training to the old case, though he struggled with the emotional weight of investigating his own family's tragedy. In 2010, 12 years after Tyler's disappearance, a breakthrough seemed imminent when hikers discovered children's clothing in a remote canyon nearly 20 miles from the Johnson cabin. The items were sent for DNA analysis, and the family endured weeks of anxious waiting before learning that the clothing belonged to another missing child from decades earlier. The discovery led to the resolution of a cold case from 1981, bringing closure to another family while leaving the Johnsons still searching for answers. Margaret celebrated her 50th birthday in 2012 with mixed emotions, knowing that Tyler would have been 19 years old and possibly starting his own adult life. She had imagined so many times what her younger son might have become, perhaps following his father into forestry work, or maybe pursuing his childhood fascination with dinosaurs through paleontology studies. The milestone birthdays were always the hardest, forcing her to confront the passage of time and the growing likelihood that she might never learn what happened to her little boy. The 20th anniversary of Tyler's disappearance in 2018 brought renewed media attention and a fresh round of tips and reported sightings. Age progression photographs showed what Tyler might look like as a 27-year-old man, with his father's strong jawline and his mother's expressive eyes. The images were distributed through social media platforms that hadn't existed during the initial investigation, reaching a new generation of potential witnesses who might have information about the case. Sheriff Martinez, now nearing retirement herself, worked tirelessly to follow up on every new lead generated by the anniversary coverage. Most proved to be cases of mistaken identity or well-meaning but inaccurate memories, but the veteran investigator refused to dismiss any possibility without thorough investigation. She had promised Margaret Johnson that Tyler's case would never be forgotten, and she intended to keep that promise regardless of how many dead ends she encountered along the way. David's health began declining in his 60s, the result of decades of physical labor and the accumulated stress of living with unresolved grief. He was forced to retire early from logging due to a back injury, but found purpose in volunteering with search and rescue organizations throughout the region. His intimate knowledge of Montana's wilderness made him invaluable in training new volunteers, and he took quiet satisfaction in helping bring other missing persons home safely, even when his own son remained lost. Jake married his college girlfriend, Patricia, in 2019, and the young couple settled in Helena, where Jake had been promoted to detective with the state police. Their wedding was bittersweet, with Tyler's absence felt keenly during family photographs and traditional moments. Margaret insisted on setting aside a small bouquet from Patricia's bridal flowers, which she later placed at the memorial stone the community had erected for Tyler in Pine Ridge's cemetery, even though there was no body to bury beneath it. The COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 disrupted many aspects of daily life, but it also led to unexpected developments in cold case investigations as people spent more time online and began sharing old photographs and memories on social media platforms. Several tips related to Tyler's case emerged from these digital excavations of the past, though none ultimately provided the breakthrough the family had hoped for. Margaret found some comfort in the virtual support groups that emerged during lockdowns, connecting with other parents of missing children from around the world. It was during the early months of 2020 that Detective Patricia Valdez of the Denver Police Department encountered a case that would change everything for the Johnson family. A man had been found living on the streets of downtown Denver, suffering from severe mental illness and unable to provide coherent information about his identity or past. The individual appeared to be in his late 20s and showed signs of long-term psychological trauma, but what caught Detective Valdez's attention were the distinctive scars on his hands and arms that seemed consistent with childhood injuries from outdoor activities. The unidentified man had been in the care of Denver's social services system for several months, receiving treatment at a psychiatric facility that specialized in helping individuals recover from severe trauma and memory loss. Dr. Michael Harrison, the facility's lead psychiatrist, had made significant progress in stabilizing the patient's condition, though the man's memories remained fragmented and inconsistent. What emerged through therapy sessions were disconnected images of forests, cabins, and a persistent fear of darkness that suggested some kind of childhood trauma related to being lost or abandoned. Detective Valdez decided to run the man's fingerprints through national databases, hoping to identify him and reunite him with any family members who might be searching for him. The results came back with a match that sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies across multiple states. The fingerprints belonged to Tyler Johnson, taken during a school safety program just weeks before his disappearance, 22 years earlier. The 7-year-old boy who had vanished while stargazing in the Montana wilderness was alive and living as a mentally ill homeless man in Colorado. Sheriff Martinez received the call from Detective Valdez on a cold February morning, and her hands trembled as she wrote down the details of Tyler's discovery. The veteran investigator had handled thousands of cases during her career, but none had affected her as personally as Tyler Johnson's disappearance. She immediately contacted Margaret and David, asking them to come to her office for an important update on their son's case. Margaret's heart raced during the drive into town, alternating between hope and dread as she tried to prepare herself for whatever news awaited them. The reunion between Tyler and his parents took place at Denver General Hospital, under carefully controlled circumstances, with medical personnel standing by to provide support if needed. Margaret and David entered the sterile hospital room where their son sat in a wheelchair, his face bearing little resemblance to the laughing 7-year-old they remembered. 22 years of unknown experiences had transformed him into a gaunt, prematurely aged man whose eyes held depths of trauma that made Margaret's heart break all over again. David approached slowly, his voice barely a whisper as he said, "Tyler, son, it's Dad." The man who had once been their little boy showed no signs of recognition as he looked at his parents with vacant, frightened eyes. Decades of mental illness and possible abuse had stolen his memories and left him unable to connect with the family who had never stopped searching for him. Margaret reached out tentatively to touch his hand, and Tyler flinched away from the contact, his body language speaking of years spent in fear and mistrust of others. The joyful reunion she had imagined countless times was replaced by the heartbreaking reality of a son who no longer knew her. Dr. Harrison explained that Tyler's condition was consistent with severe complex post-traumatic stress disorder, likely resulting from years of captivity, abuse, and psychological manipulation. His memories of his childhood and family had been either suppressed by trauma or deliberately erased through systematic psychological abuse by his captors. The recovery process would be long and uncertain, with no guarantee that Tyler would ever fully remember his life before the age of 7 or be able to form new relationships with his family members. Jake arrived at the hospital the next day, having driven straight through the night from Helena upon receiving news of his brother's discovery. The reunion between the two brothers was equally difficult, as Tyler showed no recognition of the teenager who had once helped him set the dinner table and listen to radio programs together. Jake struggled to reconcile his memories of a playful, curious little brother with the broken man sitting before him, but he committed himself to being part of Tyler's recovery process, regardless of whether his brother ever remembered him. The investigation into Tyler's disappearance took on new urgency as law enforcement agencies worked to piece together what had happened during the 22 years he had been missing. Detectives interviewed Tyler extensively, but his fragmented memories provided only scattered clues about his experiences. He recalled living in various locations, being moved frequently, and having contact with multiple individuals who kept him isolated from society. The details were too vague and disjointed to provide clear leads, but they painted a picture of systematic abuse and captivity that explained his current mental state. Federal authorities took over the investigation, recognizing that Tyler's case likely involved interstate transportation and criminal organizations that specialized in child abduction and trafficking. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was called in to create profiles of Tyler's likely captors based on his psychological condition and the few details he was able to provide. Special Agent Linda Chen, who had specialized in cases involving long-term captivity, warned the family that the investigation might take years to complete and might never result in arrests or prosecutions. Tyler's treatment team developed a comprehensive rehabilitation plan that focused on stabilizing his mental health before attempting to recover suppressed memories or rebuild family relationships. Margaret and David rented an apartment in Denver to be close to their son during his treatment, though visits were limited to short, supervised sessions that wouldn't overwhelm Tyler's fragile psychological state. They learned to celebrate small victories, like the first time Tyler made eye contact with Margaret, or the day he allowed David to sit beside his hospital bed without showing signs of panic. The media attention surrounding Tyler's discovery was intense, but carefully managed by law enforcement and the hospital's communications staff. The story of the missing child, who returned after 22 years, captured national attention, but the family's privacy was protected to ensure that Tyler's recovery wasn't compromised by unwanted publicity. Margaret found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never wanted, fielding interview requests from journalists and documentary filmmakers who wanted to tell Tyler's story. Months of intensive therapy began to yield small breakthroughs as Tyler slowly developed trust in his treatment team and began to show signs of emotional progress. Dr. Harrison reported that the patient was beginning to respond positively to art therapy sessions, creating drawings that seemed to depict forest scenes and cabin-like structures. These artistic expressions provided the first concrete evidence that some of Tyler's childhood memories remained intact beneath the layers of trauma and psychological conditioning. The first real moment of recognition came during a therapy session in late spring, when Tyler was shown a photograph of the family cabin where he had lived as a child. His eyes widened with what appeared to be familiarity, and he pointed to the image while saying the word home for the first time since his discovery. Margaret wept when Dr. Harrison shared this development, seeing it as proof that her little boy was still somewhere inside the damaged man Tyler had become. Progress remained slow and unpredictable throughout Tyler's first year back with his family. Some days brought encouraging developments, like when he remembered Jake's name or asked about the family's old dog, Rex, who had died years earlier. Other days saw setbacks that reminded everyone involved of the long road ahead. Tyler struggled with nightmares, panic attacks, and episodes of dissociation that transported him back to traumatic experiences he couldn't fully articulate or understand. The investigation into Tyler's captors continued without significant breakthroughs. Despite the best efforts of multiple law enforcement agencies, the few leads generated by Tyler's fragmented memories led to dead ends or individuals who had died or disappeared years earlier. Special Agent Chen explained to the family that cases involving such long periods of captivity were notoriously difficult to solve, especially when the victim's memories had been so thoroughly compromised by trauma and psychological manipulation. As Tyler's second year of recovery progressed, the family began to adjust to their new reality. Their son would never be the same person he had been as a 7-year-old child, and his relationship with them would need to be built from scratch based on who he was now, rather than who he had been before. Margaret and David moved back to Montana, but maintained regular contact with Tyler's treatment team and visited Denver monthly to spend time with him as his condition allowed. The breakthrough moment came during Tyler's third year of treatment, when a combination of medication adjustments and intensive therapy finally allowed him to access deeper memories of his childhood. During a particularly emotional session, he looked directly at Margaret and said, "Mum, I remember watching for shooting stars," referring to the last night they had spent together as a complete family. The words unlocked a flood of emotions for both of them, representing the first real connection between Tyler's current self and his childhood memories. Recovery remained a gradual process marked by setbacks and small victories, but Tyler's progress gave the family hope that they might eventually rebuild some version of the relationship they had lost. He began spending supervised visits at the family cabin, accompanied by his therapist, and gradually reacquainting himself with the place that had once been his home. These visits were emotionally challenging for everyone involved, but they represented important steps toward healing and integration. The criminal investigation into Tyler's disappearance officially remained open, though active leads had been exhausted, and the chances of identifying or prosecuting his captors grew smaller with each passing year. The family focused their energy on Tyler's continued recovery, rather than seeking justice for his abduction, recognizing that their son's healing was more important than punishment for those who had harmed him. Sheriff Martinez retired, knowing that she had kept her promise to never forget Tyler's case, even though the complete truth of his 22-year absence might never be fully known. Tyler Johnson's return to his family after more than 2 decades represented both the answer to their prayers and the beginning of a new chapter in their journey together. The 7-year-old boy who had disappeared while watching for shooting stars was gone forever, but the man he had become was slowly learning to trust and connect with the family who had never stopped loving him. Their story became a testament to the enduring power of hope and the possibility of healing, even after the most devastating losses and traumatic experiences.